we're going to read chapter 6. About my work with the kids at the psychiatric hospital. I've already talked a lot about them. But before I do that, does anybody have any insights or anything you want to share from last week? What we talked about? Loudly?
Yes. I read again and again all the text about the relationships that Babaji said, finally relationships are temporary, and we break up relationship even before death. And so I was thinking about it and I said, yeah, that's what I've been doing, and that's what is happening. And I was really grieving about myself finally, and then I was thinking, okay, so what does it really mean to be in a relationship with someone? What for? What's going on? How my own ankara of myself, what am I benefiting from, what I'm searching in the other one, how is it nourished or not, and what's happened all of a sudden, how am I capable then to break up with someone? I mean, yeah, and to realize that finally in this world relationships are temporary, and to wonder why finally I'm having a relationship with someone, to nourish which aspect of my life, with which value, for which goal.
Very good, very deep.
Yeah, that was, and the sentence, the Brahmana told you, okay, don't look back.
Yeah, that's very intense.
Don't look back.
Yeah. Like I couldn't even, that was my goodbye, I had his ashes like this, I was on the boat, and I had them in front of me, and we were just chanting mantras over his ashes the whole time, and I really hadn't let go of him, even though he had died 5 years before, And then he said, okay, now, and he really surprised me, because I didn't know that was going to happen, He just said, now throw it like this, over the shoulder, and don't look back. And I was like, bye, Dad. I was holding myself to not look back. It was very hard, but it was very significant. To me, that was when it actually, relationship kind of cut. Up until then, I was really in a different relationship with him still, even though he had passed away, It was very powerful and very healing, to say, okay, don't look back. But that's true for, like you said, like even current relationships we're in. Maybe we didn't cut it, but somebody else cut us. Also, maybe we want to be in that relationship and somebody else just cut us off for whatever reason too. And they never said why, and now they're just not talking to us or whatever. They moved on, and so it's also like we're still kind of looking back and trying to understand what actually happened in that relationship. Sometimes we never really process it, and that's why I think I was saying a few times at the end of life when people are dying, sometimes they're like holding on. It's like, why haven't they left their body? Why are they still? What are they holding on to? They're very much. It's like even doctors are like, I can't believe they're still alive, and it's because they haven't processed some of that stuff yet. So they're still waiting for someone to say, it's okay, you can let go. That's over now. That person forgives you, or that person loves you anyway, even though they couldn't be here. So it's a very deep introspection you did. Yeah.
And I was thinking, if I had this knowledge, I'm sure my life would have been completely different.
Yeah, that's why I feel the same way. Imagine if I was really young when I had met Babaji, and I learned all those when I was like a child, how different I would have been in my decisions, and like you said, like what the relationships you're in, why are you in them? What are you getting out of them? What are your needs? Why, and then sometimes we end them when our needs are met. Also, we're like, okay. So they're very kind of transactional, and a lot of them are not. When you really look deeply, why are you hanging on to that relationship? You must be getting something out of it, otherwise you wouldn't be in it, And same with other people. Sometimes when people drop you, it's like, oh, they don't need me anymore for whatever they were using me for, Yeah, you got a lot out of that chapter. Good job. Anything else about last week, chapter 5? You ready for 6? Yes, Vilas?
Are relationships always transactional? Is there always something, like I give this, you give that, and I need this, and you need that, so we kind of meet? Is this the core? Is this the thing that glues people together?
Just think in your own experience. Can you think of a time when you just wanted nothing at all in the relationship? Or maybe you felt like somebody wanted nothing at all from you? Have you ever been in a relationship where it was like that?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
So therefore, when we define relationship, human relationship, then it's always this, that there is some.
You're getting something and they're getting something, and maybe you're not feeling fulfilled by that because you aren't actually getting what you want from them, but you're trying. That's what keeps you holding on, and that's why they don't work because nobody can really give you, what you want, because what we want is insatiable. Even if they can give it to you, they can't give it to you as long as you want, in the exact way that you want, in the exact time that you want, and you can't do that for somebody else either. So we're just trying, And it's also all the way back to those classes I was doing last year on manas. If you think, ooh, that's who you like. Oh, it tickles my, whatever one of those five senses is. This person just looks really good. Or this person makes me feel really good. That's all. And so we just want them to do more of that thing, to hit my like button, And then the dislike, that's who we don't like. That's who we don't want to be friends with. It's very basic when you look at it. When you look at any relationship. But the smarter people are, and the more devious they are, then the more they use sweet words, and they act like they're just there to be a good friend. But you even get something out of being a good friend. That's what you know what I mean? If you're being a good friend, it's actually because that's your ahankara, that's who you think you are. A good friend, a good person, so then even that is not clean. Because if it were, then when the person made you feel like they don't need you anymore, because you're acting like you're just selflessly giving, so if they're like, oh, hey, thanks, you were a good friend, you helped me out with my thing, and now I don't need you anymore, then why would you be upset that they drop you? That's not how it is. Usually you'd be like, I did all that for you, after everything I did for you when you needed me, and now you're dropping me? That means it wasn't clean. That means you were getting something out of being the good selfless friend, too. Or if people give you money, that's another trick. That's to make you indebted to them, so then you can control them. And whenever somebody offers to help you, then there's always, that means that now they're going to own you, basically. Right? Yeah. There's never, even in the spiritual life, it's not that it's really different. That's what we're all trying to do. We're trying to clear out our anartha, but it's the same thing. That's why there's so many clashes. I mean, that's why we're practicing trying not to be like that. But first you have to see that we are like that. Then you can have more compassion for yourself and others when you see that they're doing it or we're doing it and everybody's fighting over it. But it's because we're trying to get something out of it.
And then when you say that we are frustrated when the relationship ends because, what I understood is because it was not, we were not clean about it. Right? This feeling of, after all I did for you, now you're doing this. Mm-hmm. So, what is now the conclusion or the application of this knowledge? Is it that it's very good to make it just very clear about what I want and talk about it openly, so that is this a way how to prevent this kind of resentment after a relationship ends? Or, I mean, the other way I think you suggested with what you just said is that to not desire anything from other people, and just because what I desire is insatiable, so I have to kind of look after that myself.
I would say I mean, the thing is that right now, if I give it some advice, it's not going to work for every situation, So every person is different, and every relationship is different, and even the same relationship, like husband and wife, for example, it's going to change so much over the years, So it's hard to say, oh yeah, just this is how you should do it, But in general, and also some people aren't on a spiritual path; they're just living their life, and some people are on different spiritual paths, so it depends on your goal, But I would say if you're on the path of Bhakti Yoga and you're here at Jiva Ashram, we have a pretty similar goal. And so then you can think like the types of relationships you have would be spiritual. So then you would say like, okay, that person I like to study with. So that's clean, let's study Nyaya together. Then that's more a basic one, But as soon as it starts getting like, the lines start getting blurred and other things happen in that relationship, then it's a little bit more difficult. But if you're studying together, that's a clear one, usually, but it can get messy, So you just have to be clear, what is your goal in your life? And then how does that relationship help serve you? And you have to be honest that it is serving you, otherwise you're not going to be in it. But talking about it with the other person, maybe. It depends, but it's not that you go to everybody and share everything. Because that they may not be aware that they're doing it, and they wouldn't like it if you point it out, and it's a little bit weird in our culture to just be like, hey, I'm using you and you're using me, so I just want to let you know the way I'm going to use you, and when we're all done, or if you don't let me use you in the way I want it, let's wrap it up, That's kind of like... That's kind of a little, we might not have any friends. So I would say it's better to just realize that you're trying to get something out of every relationship, and make sure you get your needs met. Because that's what the other person's doing probably unconsciously anyway. And then introspect and watch yourself. It's kind of funny to watch yourself. Like when you watch it, then it helps to see like, okay, I'm doing that because this is that need I had, like Ladali was asking, in every relationship, what are the needs I'm trying to get met, It's a good introspection, especially when you live at an ashram, there's so many different relationships, different situations. Why do I hang out with that person more than that person? And you see, if you watch, it's because that person's doing something to make you feel good about yourself. Unless you have a samskara of an abusive parent or something, and then you hang out with people who make you feel bad about yourself, because that's comfortable for you. But somehow it fits with your makeup. Otherwise, why don't we all have the same relationships with each other, Because, we don't all like the same people because of our samskaras and the way our ahankara is aligned. But when it gets down to this, it's really funny when you say, I love you, then, what does that even mean? It just means I love how you make me feel about myself. That's what he was trying to say. Like when my dad died, it was very selfish that I'm grieving for all these years. I was just crying for myself. Like, oh, I miss you. What does that really mean? I miss you. I miss how you made me feel about myself. So then it's kind of like, I wasn't even sad that he died of a heart attack, really. I was just sad that it was traumatic. He didn't let me know that he was going to leave like that. Kind of messed me up a little. Traumatized me, It was about me. The whole thing was about me. So when you realize that, it's like, oh, he's probably, I really wasn't that concerned about his suffering. I was more concerned about how he made me feel and how that hole in my life, I couldn't call him anymore. So he couldn't make me feel good anymore. So now I had to find someone else to make me feel good, and that's so inconvenient for me. Kind of a downer when you really look at it, but it's... Anything else on this chapter? Should we move to the kids? Good?
Sorry. I think I had a doubt when we last started with the topic, and I'm not sure if I could solve it. So while you were speaking, so how you were explaining it, it is that it was more based on the ahankara and the manas, right? That's what we need, our ahankara food and our manas to have this like from the other person in the relationship. So before you explained all this, I was thinking that in relationships we try to get what we did not get from our parents. So now I'm not so clear on how to combine those things. Or is No, both things are true, right? I mean, what you said, obviously, of course, just now. And the thing with the parents, I guess it's also like that, isn't it? That we
Yeah,
try
I mean,
to...
that manas and ahankara, when I'm teaching Vedic psychology before last year, I know, and I'm really highlighting just one part, it's just so you can see it in isolation, but they don't work like that alone. I was just trying to, it'd be like a car, and you're like, now the car's driving down the road, so it's mostly the gas pedal and the steering wheel, right? It's not really the engine, is it? No, it's the engine too. So it's always some scars are involved.
Yeah, okay, that was the missing.
Yeah, they're
link.
all three of those are, the one thing that's missing usually is buddhi. That's the missing part, you know, that's being used by ahankara. Ahankara is, come here, like, you dummy, let's do this. But those three are always together. So of course, remember the manas has nothing on it, it's a blank screen. So what's coming up on it are those samskaras that are driving you to like who you like and to not like who you don't like. And manas quickly just, like a brainstem reaction, quickly stamps it like or dislike. They're all working together. So yeah, and that's why you're like, wait, I don't understand. How could so-and-so like this person? That person is so horrible. How could that person like, you know, but if you start getting to know the person A who likes person B, and you're like, how does person A like person B? I like person A, and person A likes me, but I hate person B, but they like person B. How is that possible? If you understand person A, and they're probably their parents, and their childhood relationships, then you'll be like, they're really good friends with person B because that's their abusive mother, incognito. And if you didn't have an abusive mother, then you're not going to like that person. I'm simplifying it, but that's why, you know, it's coming, your likes and dislikes are coming from your samskaras. Manas just automatically responds to like and dislike, you know, but it's coming from the samskaras. So that's how we decide also what we want and don't want in relationships. It has to match with our samskaras, you know. But yes, you're right.
Samskara was
Yeah. So we can think of it as a package. Yeah.
Just a follow-up question with that thing. But then these type of things, they're happening basically, I don't want to say automatically, but there is not a real deliberation. It's coming out of...
They're all three automatic. Those three work together.
Yeah.
The deliberation would be the buddhi, but your buddhi has to be in sattva.
Okay.
That's why I started the last year saying, let's sattvasize our senses. Let's go really slow and sattvasize your senses.
Yes,
and then your buddhi gets strong, and then it can see what the other three parts of the mind are doing. And then it can catch it and say, you stop that ahankara, knock it off, you know? And you, manas, you're being too emotional. Come on now. It's just a samskara. You know, the buddhi can manage the whole thing. And just that's why one of our e-courses, we called it the circus of the mind. Because buddhi can see it all. If your buddhi's in sattva, and if you have this knowledge, then you can take distance from those three crazy fools, basically, and manage them and not act on them. The buddhi is the stopgap. The more sattvic the buddhi is, the more distance you'll have between those three parts of the mind, and the more you can just put the brakes on. And say, oh no, you can be, that's why Babaji is always talking about your awareness. It's raising your level of awareness with the buddhi. And then you just see it from over here. They look like they're over there, you know, and you're like, oh, look at manas. But you're not absorbed in that whole story. Yeah. There's no deliberation now.
Yeah.
I mean, if you got those three going around like three crazy monkeys on the jiva rooftop.
So then also the relation, they are basically just the result of the previous samskaras.
Yeah.
And they are not really based on something.
Well, what else could they be based on?
Yeah.
And the best part about Hankara is it rationalizes. It will say, buddhi, come over here. I mean, not that we're aware of any of that, it's automatic, but it rationalizes why it is that this person in your life is so great and this person's so horrible. But there's no person actually who's so great and so horrible. It's only through your filter. If it was true that there's one person who's so great, then why don't we all love that same person?
Yeah.
So that means that it's all based on your personal opinion, based on your samskaras, you know.
The previous experiences. Okay.
Great.
To make a map how to navigate.
Yeah. And you know, the vision is very hard to change your vision, you know, and then especially when you're living in a spiritual community, and then you see Babaji and he's kind to everybody, he's so nice to everybody. So why aren't we like that? Why does he just accept everybody? And why do we only want to be friends with that person, we don't like that person? Why is that? Yeah, he's beyond that. He has the vision. Even if there is somebody who's a troublemaker, he's not going to kick them out. If you think about it, he's kind to that person too. Why?
Because he sees the mechanism which is moving that particular person and that particular person, and he's compassionate
and he doesn't exist on like and dislike.
He's not affected.
Yeah, and he sees everybody's good qualities.
Mm-hmm.
He sees the good in everybody. And then why would he get hung up on the bad and be like, I don't like you? He sees the good and he tries to help that with people. Mm-hmm. He sees everybody's swabhava. Awesome, our strengths.
Mm-hmm.
But that's because his ahankara is not attached to it. Is this person giving me my ahankara food? Is this person making me feel good? He's not driven by that.
Mm-hmm.
But usually people try to, it's just a whole different way of seeing things if you're not caught up with all that. The ahankara and the manas and the samskaras, Mm. If you're not trying to get anything from anybody, imagine how that would be in your life.
Oof. Out of the jail.
Huh?
Looks like out of the jail.
Yeah, out of the jail.
Mm.
Because you have to, and actually what happens is you end up having, because you want X, Y, and Z from this person, and X, Y, and Z from that person, and B from that person, and N from that person, whatever the things are that you need from different people, then what happens is you compromise your character.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, well, I don't really want to do that thing, but I'm going to do it because I need that other thing from them. We become like a beggar, desperate, If, for example, if you're a lonely person, if you feel lonely, which a lot of people struggle with feeling lonely, then you'll probably hang out with not that great company just because you don't want to be by yourself. There's many ways, if you really look at the whatever your weakness is, then you'll end up compromising yourself in certain ways and compromising your goals in life. Just to feed that, whatever that painful samskara is, or to cover it. Anything else? Good question. Anything else? On that high note, let's move. Let's read about kids in a psychiatric hospital. Okay. So this is chapter 6. Ancient Indian stories unfold at a modern psychiatric hospital. After hearing, so remember the last week it was about this, Babaji, please advise what happens when a person dies, right? So then, after hearing illuminating explanations from Babaji about the nature of the mind, human relations, death, and the afterlife, my head and heart were full. This made the 16-hour flight from Delhi to New York whiz by. Normally, I would be like the guy next to me, snuggled up under a fluffy blanket, fast asleep. The temperature was just right, the cabin lights were dimmed, and dinner service was complete. The atmosphere could not have been more perfect for a long, uninterrupted slumber. Yet sleep was the last thing on my mind. I was buzzing with excitement as I devoured a classic Indian book called the Hitopadesha. Etched on the palm leaves of this original Sanskrit text lie instructions on how to be smart in relationships and decision-making, two important skills in all walks of life. And this is a picture of the original Hitopadesh book. This is one of many ancient books that Babaji has translated from Sanskrit into English and has provided detailed commentary on. What made it especially captivating for me was that it was written in a very clever form of short stories that depict the psychology of animals with human-like personalities. I stayed up the entire night on that flight, devouring each page about a tiger tricking a traveler, a cat conning a bird, a mouse fooling a monk, and other enchanting animal tales. By the time the plane touched down in New York, I had read the entire Hitopadesha from cover to cover. The pages were now decorated with my bright pink highlights and notes scribbled in the margins. What was so special about that book, you might ask? It certainly didn't look so special on the outside with its boring brown hardback cover. A scrawled cartoon sketch of a tiger and some Sanskrit letters which I couldn't read and didn't know the meaning of. In fact, if I had seen this book at a bookstore or on Amazon.com, I'm sure I would have just moved on past it. So that's my dislike. Ding. It was only through my good fortune of a chance meeting with one of Babaji's students that I even ended up with this precious gem. This one small, unassuming book had completely seduced me. It changed the fundamental way I thought about therapy, and as a result, changed the course of hundreds of kids' lives. The timing could not have been more perfect. Babaji's student just happened to be at the ashram, having come all the way from Poland, at the exact time of my brief 2-day visit. As a newcomer at Babaji's ashram, I didn't know anyone there, and this student was kind enough to take the time to break down my introverted shell and try to get to know me. During our conversation on the rooftop of Jiva Institute, I shared that I was a psychotherapist working with children who suffered from severe mental health disorders. The next day, when I was departing for the airport, he generously gave me Babaji's Hitopadesha book as a gift. He casually mentioned that the book was full of stories about animals, and he suggested that maybe I could use these stories with the kids I work with. Little did he know what an impact his small act of kindness would make. This book became not only a treasure to me, but also to so many of the depressed, anxious, misunderstood, traumatized, and abused children that were locked up in a psychiatric hospital and all but forgotten. Most of these kids had been so badly neglected and abused, sexually, physically, mentally, or emotionally, that it was difficult for them to open up in therapy and talk about what had happened to them. So what they did instead was to misbehave in dreadful and sometimes horrifying ways. Some of them would smash the glass windows out in the hallway, which occurred about once a week. Remember, I told that story. Some would spit or curse at me. That was fun. Some would try to tackle or punch me. Did I tell you guys a story about how we had to take self-defense training at the hospital? So the bodyguards, they're these huge big guys, and they said all the therapists have to take training in self-defense, and I'm like, oh my God. So we had to go in the gym, and they had all these mats laid out, and they were like, they're like football players. Their arms were so big, and their shirts were digging into their arm. They had the huge biceps. They're like, okay, now we're doing some self-defense training, and I'm like, and I had my pretty Indian blouse on. I didn't want to do self-defense training, And so we go in there, and then you have to get a partner, and they show you now if the kid's coming at you like this, you do this, and throw them down and pin them down. I'm like, I don't want, and they thought it was fun. And they were like, let us demonstrate. And they're twirling each other around, and I'm like, I don't want to do it, I'm just going to watch. And they're getting mad at me. They're like, you have to learn how to do this, I'm like, it's just not my style. And they're like, well, it was the worst. And you had to do it and you had to pass. You had to demonstrate that you know how to do it. So, I got my partner and I'm like, okay, I just couldn't get, I don't know. I'm not, anyway. We had to do self-defense training, and actually some of the therapists used it. They had to use it. Thank God I didn't, but I had some close calls where I was quite nervous being in a room with somebody, because when these kids would have these, psychotic breaks, they would be in psychosis, so they think you're a three-headed monster talking to them, or they think you don't look like a normal person. You look like some devil trying to attack them and speaking. And so if they freak out and you're sitting in a room with them, some of them are big. They're up to age 18 there, so they can, attack you, throw you down, come at you. They did that to some of the therapists. So that's a little scary. Being there. Every day your life was on the line, it felt like. Okay. So where did I get back to smashing the windows? Okay. So they would try to tackle me or punch me. Luckily I had it was a very small office that I had, so I had my room set up. Whenever a new therapist come, you always analyze, what's the best way to set up your office if the kid attacks you, That was the thought process. It wasn't how to make it look pretty, feng shui, nothing like that. It was what's the best way? You shouldn't box yourself in. You should be able to run out the door if you need to, It was really crazy. So I had my desk, so if they walked in, I was basically behind my desk, so then I couldn't get out the door. So what they told me is if the kid comes after you, if you feel strong enough to fight them, you can try, but otherwise you just go onto your desk. I know. They weren't even allowed to have a pen or a pencil because they would use it as a weapon to try to stab themselves or others, So it was like that's why I kept a big thing of candy. I'd be like, have some candy, yes, okay. And I had blankets like this in the room. Wrap yourself in a blanket. And I'd play calming music when they came in, so. But anyway. So you guys tell me now if you think this is what I'm going to say happened here, it's coming on the next page, is worse than in getting attacked. Which would you prefer? Listen to what happened, okay? So some would ignore me and not answer my questions. Some would talk to me, but in completely nonsensical ways. My clients, they would either be like lying, like I would know what happened because we had rounds every day. So we'd meet, the whole team would meet and say, so-and-so did this. And I'm like, what? She never told me about that, because they would come to therapy too every day. But in therapy, they wouldn't tell that they just punched somebody, or whatever. So they would lie, and or they would just say I would be talking to them. A lot of them were, the medication wasn't working yet, even though they're on multiple medications for the hearing voices sometimes. But you'd see them and they'd be talking to the voices in their head, and it was my first experience, because before that I was a grief counselor in hospice. That's a whole different kettle of fish, people who are dying versus young kids who are psychotic, And so the first, few months on the job, it was very, I was like, oh, I don't know what to do, because they would be like, no, and I'm like, oh, are they talking to me? And I'm like, oh no, they're talking to the voice in their head. They'd be screaming and yelling. This one guy I'll never forget, he was like a huge, big, 17, 18-year-old boy. And he was obese. He was really big and tall, and he had bright red hair. And I forgot what the drug is he used, but it wasn't a legal drug. It might have been glue, or I think it was called a whippet, something like a paint thinner, or he had used something that was basically cheap to get a high from, and he became schizophrenic after that. Like it screwed up his brains, and he never came back from that. So he kept thinking that either he was Jesus Christ or Jesus Christ was coming, I forgot, but he was so big, and he would throw himself on the ground and go, oh God, Jesus Christ, oh! And he'd start and it was like, whoa, so I didn't know what to do. And then he would get angry and start screaming and yelling and punching, So I told the staff, I'm like, I really can't be with him in my room. So then I would have to go into the unit room where it's like all glass windows, and the bodyguards would stand right outside. So when he would do that, I'd be like, okay, we're going to talk at another time now. Thank you. But, so anyway. Okay, so that's what I mean by the voices in their heads, So they would, and some of them, they would hear voices in their heads, but they wouldn't react like that. But they would think it was so real, that like they'd be like, like it was telling them don't talk or don't make eye contact with her, or they would sometimes actually tell me what the voice was saying, but in a calm way, so I learned a lot about it. I mean, nothing I had done in my schoolwork had prepared me for this. You read about it, I'm like, oh, that's interesting, okay, that must be an odd case here and there. But when you see it every day, it's like, wow, the human mind can do some very intense things, And it's very sad when the medicines don't work. And then how's therapy going to work? Talk therapy, I was like, what am I supposed to do? Really, am I going to sit here and have a conversation with them, That's not going to work, So it was really sad, and I felt bad that we couldn't do more for these kids. Yes, that boy I was telling you about who had the delusion that Jesus Christ was giving him some crucial message and that he needed to act on it right away. Some would blame or accuse me of being the reason for their pain, and the worst therapist ever. That was fun. I was the worst therapist ever for many reasons, but one of them was because I wouldn't discharge them. So they had to follow a treatment plan, and if they followed it well, then they're going to get discharged. They'll say, yeah, she's doing that and that and that, she's good now. But basically, they were pissed off that they had to be there because they were put there against their will. It was like a prison, basically. They were too young to be in prison, but if they were older than 18, they would have been in a prison for their behavior, So they were so pissed off that they were there. And so they didn't want to do what the therapy is, and they didn't understand, if you don't follow this plan that we made together, you're going to be here a really long time. And they'd be like, you're the worst therapist ever. I hate you, Miss Jessica. I'm like, okay, thank you for sharing. Next. It was so hard. It was the world's hardest job. The average length that somebody lasted on this job as a therapist was 6 months. It was people were so burned out. And then some people were like, I don't want to be a therapist after that. People just quit the whole idea, because it's like, who would want to be a therapist? It doesn't pay very much, and it's a very hard job. So why would you want to do it? Because you want to help people. That's your swabhava. But some people, their swabhava must have just gotten fried, They're just like, I think I want to, I don't know, like do underwater scuba diving or something. Just, I don't want to be around people. Some of them really got fried, So some would yell loudly at me in a fit of rage. Some would blame or accuse me for being the reason for their pain, the worst therapist ever. Some would try to run out of my office. Oh, that was so I'm doing therapy, and every 15 minutes they have to be checked. So I have to be signing the sheet every 15 minutes, even when I'm with them for the hour, And then some of them would get pissed off, and they would open my door and start running down the halls screaming. And you could hear it echoing down the halls, and I'm like, oh, what am I supposed to do? So then you have to call over the loudspeaker, I forgot what it was, like 7 alert, or you had to say some code. And then the bodyguards are running down, you can hear all the keys and the money jangling in their pockets, and they're running down the halls, trying to find the kid, It was like, it was a very high stress job, put it that way. And then one of them even successfully escaped from the hospital altogether, one of my kids. So we each had about 10. Usually our caseload was about 10. So one of mine, she snuck out the back door and she ran out into the woods. And our hospital was very far away from anything purposefully, to keep it, because what if they run out into the streets? It's better to keep them in a secluded place so they can't get very far, and we could catch them. But this girl, she was just in the woods somewhere, and she was on the news. And it was my patient. And of course, they're like, how did you let her do that? I'm like, I didn't let her do that. She was not with me in those 15 minutes or whatever. But she was all over the news. She was 14, but she was part of a gang. And she called up one of the gang people, one of the guys who was probably 25, and he took her. And helicopters were searching for her, just going over the whole hospital and searching searchlights, and yeah. She was on the evening news, and I ended up seeing, they got her back eventually, I think a day or two later. And usually when they run, what they do is they find people that they're part of the gang, that's part of their gang, and then they go and do drugs again, they do all the bad stuff again, so then they come back, and we have to test them for all that, and we have to start their treatment plan over again, and they're so angry when they come back. That's when they'll spit at you, they'll curse at you, and they're just, so that's what happened with her. I'm just giving you a backdrop. This is pre-Hitopadesh, just to get an idea of my life at this hospital. And I basically wanted to quit every day. But in order to get licensed to have a private practice, you have to get a certain number, I forgot, 1,000 hours or something of client hours. And this hospital was known as almost like a meat factory. I mean, it was just like a factory in terms of pumping out therapists to get those hours. Because no therapist can get those hours in a short amount of time in other places. But if you do it here, you have to work so many hours that you can get it in 2 years, which is very fast. Usually it takes 3 or 4 years, but if you go here, you can crank out the hours quickly. So that's why I was like holding on for dear life, just get me done with this. But anyway, so I nervously watched the evening news from inside. My client's face was plastered all over the news headlines: a missing person, dangerous and potentially armed. Yeah, she had guns. She's 14. And she told me where she would keep the gun, how she would shoot, how she saw her boyfriend shoot somebody and then run him over with the car, the whole thing. Needless to say, some patients stood out more than others, like the waif-like 12-year-old girl who was plagued with extreme anxiety. She would sit in my office for the entire session and let out blood-curdling screams for no reason at all. The sound was worse than nails down a chalkboard for me, and being witness to it certainly decreased my belief in my ability to actually help her. She was quite possibly the most difficult patient for me. I mean, there was no conversation. Even the people in psychosis, I would try to get a little bit in their world and understand. But for her, as soon as I looked at her, she'd be like, ah, and just scream as loud as she could. And she wasn't experiencing psychosis. She was extremely angry that her parents put her there, and she wouldn't tell her story. So I never actually got to know her. I don't know her. And some people they had such severe mental issues, and then the insurance would only cover for 7 days. So what are we going to get done in 7 days? So that was that girl's case. She would come every day, scream at the top of her lungs. I'd be like, let's do a family session. I was trying to act calm, Let's do a family session. We'll call your parents. Put them on the speakerphone. I'm like, oh, why don't you tell your parents how you're doing today? And she's like, ah! And I'm like, oh yeah, okay. Thank you for sharing. I'm like, all right, anything else you want to share? And I'm like, okay, thanks a lot. 1 minute, let me inhale my chocolate over here, and that's it. That was our session. I'm like, all right, I think you need to go back to the unit now. Okay, thank you, I'll see you tomorrow. We'll try again tomorrow. I mean, I don't know what her story was, but so quite possibly the most difficult patient for me, however, was a little 7-year-old boy. So that girl was really hard for me because I felt like I could just helpless trying to help her, but this boy was the hardest. 7. I mean, when's the last time you saw a 7-year-old? They're like this big, they're so innocent and they're so sweet and so young. And so I totally thought, what is this little baby doing here, this poor baby, I think it was one of the youngest kids I ever had. And I thought it was going to be an easy case. We're just going to play with some teddy bears, So I thought this would be a piece of cake, this boy. He was so young, he was so naive. Wrong. I was completely dead wrong. One fine day, this little guy, he pulled his pants down and he pooped right there on the hospital floor. He looked at me and he was just like, fuck you, and he pulled his pants down, he did a big poop right in the hospital floor. And I'm like, purposely, out of anger. And he just squatted down like he was outside in the woods on a camping trip, and he pooped. And if that wasn't bad enough, he then picked it up and he threw it at me. Oh. Thank God he missed. It was, that was the highlight of my day. Dear diary, today the highlight was that when the boy pooped and he threw it at me, he missed. Thank you very much. Okay. It was difficult to find the motivation to go to work every day, as you can tell by these stories, and even more difficult to feel optimistic and energetic about helping these kids who seemed beyond help. So you've got the backdrop. Okay, this is my life, day in the life at the hospital before I met Babaji and before the Hitopadesh. So by the time I met Babaji, I didn't have that much more time at the hospital. It wasn't like I was my first day of work there. I was gritting through, but anyway, I was just like, get me through. I was kind of hopeless and helpless at that point, when I met him. And so these Hitopadesh stories were the impetus that I needed to kind of push through and try to be useful with them and actually distract myself so I can get through the hours I still needed to get licensed. They gave me hope that I might possibly be able to get through to these kids, even if only in some small way. So riding on this momentum, as soon as I arrived back home in Florida, I began making a worksheet about one of the book's tales. It was about a tiger who tricks a traveler into coming close to him so he can eat him for lunch. Even though the story is about an animal, it was written and explained at an adult level of understanding. So I rewrote the story for kids. I added some funny pictures, and I also included discussion questions to foster the development of their critical thinking skills. At each point where there was a decision to be made in the story, I would write in the questions for the kids to answer, such as, do you trust the tiger's words? What would you do? Would you go in the pond to get the gold bracelet from him? What about the tigers in your life? Is there anyone you don't trust? Has anyone ever tricked you like a tiger tricked the traveler? How did they break your trust? I would make up games for the kids to play, such as voting on what they would do, and I would encourage them to try to convince each other to change their mind. This gave them a chance to think more deeply about their decisions and to practice their debating skills. Some days the whole room came to life in fun and invigorating debates about whether the tiger was trustworthy or not. It was actually amazing, you guys. I mean, up until then, you hear these stories. Like, it was very hard to ever really make a true connection with a kid. And even if you thought, well, okay, we've connected, the very next hour they're doing something that's like completely off the wall, and then you try to talk to them about it and they get pissed off at you. Like, there's not really an ability to really make a true therapeutic bond with any. The kids are too unstable, too untrusting, so it was so hard. So that's why with the Hitopadesh, I was just throwing what we call like a Hail Mary, just maybe in a 1% chance this might work, and so it was so beautiful actually when the whole room just became quiet when I started reading it, I couldn't believe it. And then they all started answering. And I'm like, where did these kids come from? Are these the same kids yesterday who were doing all those things, It was really like a miracle, how interested they were, how engaged they were. And actually, if you think about it, like, we were required to do therapy for the insurance to be to pay for them to be there. They had to be seen by me every day individually. That we had to have group therapy 2 days a week. I mean, there's many requirements that they need. Is a very intensive what they would get, right? So what are you going to do as a therapist when you're so burned out and you're so fried? 50% of the job was also paperwork. Tons of paperwork for each kid, because then you have to submit it to insurance to get paid, so you can't even do the therapy, and then you're too busy with the paperwork and these long treatment plans and all that. And then on top of that, when you do see them, it's very painful for them to even be seen. As soon as you meet with them, they're already acting up, so the job was like, there's no like soft spot in the job. There's nothing really a nice part to the job, and then after all that, you're supposed to think of some creative group activity you're supposed to do with a bunch of kids who are fighting and yelling, and what are you going to do with these kids? So the therapists were always asking each other, like, what are you going to do with your kids on Thursday? I don't know, like arts and crafts? Yeah, but so-and-so is going to eat the glue. Oh yeah, we can't do that. I don't know. So any idea you have usually would turn out not to work with the kids. And very often the group would end early, or they just weren't into it. It was very hard to keep their attention. So that's why, really I was very surprised as soon as I started reading the Hitopadesh that they were into it and that they were all engaging. It was really, really amazing to see. So some days the whole room came to life in fun and invigorating debates about whether the tiger was trustworthy or not. At the end of each story, I would ask them to write down what they thought the moral of the story was and to read it aloud to the group, and then we would discuss it. Although there were only 6 stories in this volume of the Hitopadesha, we spent an entire year reading and discussing them. Because next week when I come to the book club, I'll bring some of the stories and read them to you guys and show you, They're very simple, but sometimes just one page of the worksheet, we'll spend the whole group hour on that. Because we'd read it and I'd be like, I don't know, would you trust the tiger? And I would ask and they would say yes or no and why. And I'd be like, okay, let's get into teams, debate. Who trusts the tiger and who doesn't? Why or why not? And then they'd start telling their stories too. That's when their actual stories came out. I got to know them way better running group therapy than individual therapy. Individual therapy, they were just shut down. They want to come in. If my best clients would just want to come in, eat a little bit of the candy, and have me, for that hour we got to be together, go on YouTube and play some music that they weren't allowed to listen to. So I would just put on whatever they wanted to hear, and they would like eat candy and dance. And I'd be like, okay, great session, So that's my best clients, And we're not going to get into the fact that their father raped them when they were 3. That's not going to happen. They, even though in the intake paperwork it's all there. But if you ask them, they're going to be like, F you, and they don't want to talk about it. So mostly I would just do what would appease them, So, but in the group therapy, I was so surprised, but because I'm not saying, well, it said when you were 3, your father raped you, because I'm not doing that. They would come out with their stories. They would be like, my father was a tiger. Really? In my mind, I'm like, I know, it said it on your intake paperwork. We've been here 6 months. You haven't told me that yet, but I know it. But anyway, and they would tell their stories to each other in the group. And then so-and-so would be like, oh, actually, my brother was like that to me. And my cousin would so it all started coming out because of the Hitopadesh stories. It was so cool. And yeah. So I said, we spent the entire year reading and discussing them and bringing them to life. For example, I gave them arts and crafts activities to bring out important points of the story. They worked for months on one of the stories, diligently creating their costumes and memorizing their lines to present an entire play around the story of the jackal, the crow, and the deer. And that I did with the unit of kids who were 8 and younger. I couldn't believe it. One of the boys, the pooping boy, that group, what I did was I said, okay, and I talked to the unit heads and I said, tell me who are the best behaved kids. I don't care if they're my clients or not, my 10 caseload, just tell me who are the best behaved kids. In other words, who could sit with me and do this play, who could follow along. So the pooping boy didn't get to come, but it was his unit, So they gave me about maybe 7 kids, I think. And I said, okay, so those 7 I brought to my room and I said, do you guys want to do a play? And they're like, yeah. So I read them the play and I said, you can pick which character you want to be in the play. And then the other kids on the unit got to hear about it. They're like, we want to be a part of it too. So slowly I started, including all the kids, and the whole unit ended up doing the play. But there's a few key actors that we would meet, a special meeting in my room with hot chocolate and reading the story and talking about who's going to be what character, It was so cool. So I ended up doing it with more than my original 10. And then actually what happened, I don't know if I wrote it in here or not, but I ended up training all the therapists on it. So there's about 13 therapists, and because my manager said, how are you keeping your kids in the room? Why aren't they fighting in the group therapy anymore? And how's this working? And I said, we're doing these stories. And she said, let me see them. So I sent her the worksheets, and she goes, these are amazing. We should train the therapists. So we trained all the therapists. And then Babaji actually came to the hospital, and he trained with me, all the therapists. We sat there with all those 13 therapists. He wasn't allowed past those double doors where the kids were, thank you, God, because who knows what he would have seen, right, with those kids. But anyway, he came on the staff side, you know, when you first come in, and we met with those therapists, and we trained them all together on the Hitopadesh. It was so cool. You know, that he got to see, you know, the impact. And all the staff were asking questions, and it was really special.
Are they still doing it?
I don't know, because I've been gone now 10 years. That would be nice to know, but that's a high turnover place. Like in the 2 years I was there, which I was considered very senior, 2 years, but I had two bosses. I mean, even the manager would turn over every year. Like, so and the one who, you know, the two I had both loved the Hitopadesh and were very supportive, but who knows after that? They probably squashed it, you know. So the jackal, the crow, and the deer. And then one of my patients, this was their understanding of the moral of the story of the tiger and the traveler. This is the client's actual handwriting. She said, the moral of the story is trust your gut instinct and don't be overly trusting and don't be gullible. That's pretty good for a 14-year-old. So at first glance, one might see this anecdote of some kids in a group therapy session reading and discussing a simple story about a tiger, or making arts and crafts or a play as really quite benign. That's normal kid stuff, right? One might argue. That's true, however, these kids were not normal in the sense that they were labeled with heavy psychiatric diagnoses that hindered their regular functioning. No one would believe it if they saw the way in which these kids were responding to these ancient Indian fables. It was truly astounding. Kids who usually remained quiet, they actually spoke up. Kids who were typically shy, they became animated. Kids who normally hogged the airtime, they sat back and attentively listened to others. Kids who usually acted selfishly displayed empathy. I couldn't believe it. Empathy and compassion. It was amazing. Kids who were autistic or socially awkward participated in an appropriate manner, and their peers accepted them for once. Kids who were angry talked about their anger instead of storming off or punching the wall. Kids who had been abused, betrayed, bullied, they all told their stories over the year. We read these animal stories. And even though I was their therapist and I had been working with them in individual sessions for hours per week and months on end, these kids shared stories in our Hitopadesh group that I'd never heard before. I was blown away and truly flabbergasted that such simple stories about animal antics could get the kids to open up like this. The group had taken on a life of its own, and the kids could count on the supportive, safe, fun, and encouraging atmosphere to release their own stories in a healthy way. For example, now I finally knew why Mary smoked pot and ran away from home at age 12. No wonder she despised going to group therapy for her so-called drug addiction, because the drug addiction wasn't the issue at all. No wonder Mary clammed up, sitting with me hour after hour and week after week, forced to talk about her depression. Young Mary was not a drug addict, and nor was she depressed. She wasn't even a bad kid. She was just reacting to the trauma that she had experienced. It turns out she was scared of the family friend who had sexually abused her and whom she was absolutely terrified to tell anyone about. So smoking pot helped her to forget about this memory. Actually, Mary could have lived many years like that, just using pot to repress her painful feelings, as so many of my clients do. But somehow, hearing the story about this tricky tiger got Mary to boldly and unapologetically reveal to the entire group about the tiger in her life. Over time, as we read more of the Hitopadesh tales, one after the other, the kids started opening up and telling their own terribly horrifying true life stories. Most of them had experienced a close encounter with a tiger or two in their lives. I'm going to stop there, and next week I'm going to read Mary's story. We wrote it together. So we followed the Hitopadesh format of the worksheets that I wrote, you know. But what I realized is because they were opening, I'm like, let's just go with it and see. You know, they're so open. So I said, all right. So when Mary was in my office, because she revealed to me, in other words, she was there and everyone was they made her take this extra group because she's a drug addict. This little girl was labeled as a drug addict for using pot, you know? But she wasn't a drug addict. She had been sexually abused, you know, and she was having flashbacks to this, you know, friend, her family friend who had done that to her, you know? So when she told the story in the group and then she told me the story, I'm like, oh, you know, let's get the whole thing out. And I said, you want to try to do it with you being an animal? You know? And she's like, yeah, I do. So we wrote a whole story exactly like the Hitopadesh, page by page, you know, with a worksheet and questions. And I think it must have taken us maybe a month, like at least 3 or 4 or 5 times that we met just doing her story. And she healed so much from that, you know? So then with another kid I did it, and with another kid. So those 3 stories I'm going to read here. So this chapter is going to be a little bit long because I want to show you the power of storytelling. That's a big thing that Babaji always talks about, right? The power of storytelling. These 3 kids healed tremendously, you know? And what we would do is we'd sit there and I'd be like, okay, what animal do you want to be? You know? And they would tell me the animal, and then we'd go on Google and search for a picture of that animal, and we put it in there. We made the whole thing together. And as they told me their story, I'd write it, you know? And I'd make it like kind of fun and engaging. And so I'm going to read to you Mary's story next week. And you'll see. And I'll also bring the Hitopadesh story of the tiger and the traveler, just to show you how I made it, like how it looks. You know, the other thing is, if any of you are interested, Babaji and I made an e-course on the tiger and the traveler. It's for kids, but we hired a cartoonist. And he made it like a cartoon, you know? And I mean, adults can take it too, because there's short modules, 1 or 2 minutes each, like, you know, should you trust the tiger or not? So it's really good for parents to use with kids, teachers to use with kids, and also just any idea, like the template of a tiger and you with the tiger in your life. It can even be used for you guys, you know? So that's, you know, our hope would be that as many parents can use that as possible, and teachers with kids, to teach them about who the tiger is, because it's never obvious. It's very rarely obvious who the tiger is in your life, you know? And that's the idea we made with that cartoon. But first it was a story. It was a worksheet, you know? And then we made it into this e-course for kids and families. So it's on our website, and there's a free clip. If you just want to see how it looks, you can click on the Tiger and Traveler story, and you can watch like a minute video clip of it. So anyway, so that's all for today. Thank you guys for being here. Tomorrow next week we'll start with questions and insights you have from what we did, and then I'll read Mary's story in the Hitopadesh worksheet next week. Okay?